as a leader, you want to be involved in figuring out how do we shape that? How do we think about that? How do we structure that? How do we set the right set of principles? And then let the team go. Amount of things that are kind of coming towards you is fairly significant. So, you spend a lot of time trying to figure out how do you ruthlessly prioritize, where do you focus your time on. It's hard to do something when you feel it's just a job. And I know this will sound corny, but we do it because we're passionate about the company, what it is, and what it could become. So you want to invest a lot in it.
So look, after Matei and Reynold, who both are Databricks co-founder, we are super happy to host today Arsalan with us, who is also one of the Databricks co-founders. So thank you so much, Arsalan, for being with us. We know you're super busy, so thanks a lot.
Of course, happy to be here.
So I feel like you are maybe a little bit a less public known face compared to like Matei and Reynold, who are working on Spark. So I feel like we owe you a proper introduction. So you have a PhD in computer science from Berkeley. You spent 4 years at McKinsey, and then you joined Databricks right at the beginning. And I think I heard you were actually managing the sales team at Databricks when you joined. Is that a true thing?
Yeah. So it was kind of funny, right? When we were starting the company, I guess I was the quote unquote token, business guy as well, which meant that look, all of us were technical when we started, and as a result of that, though, all of us spent a ton of our time coding. But I remember back then, Jan, who was our CEO there, was like, okay, Arsalan, I need you to come join. And we have all of these kind of things we need to do. What he really wanted me, to start on at the very beginning was adding, commenting features, to the notebooks. But then he's like, in your spare time, do the things like, marketing and pricing and go to market and business development and all of those. I mean, you were at McKinsey, you should, know some of those things. And then, so sure, why not? So then as we started in the very early days, like it wasn't called sales, it was called customer engagement, actually, which was anybody who spent time dealing with customers. And way before we even hired salespeople, we had solution architects because most of your time back then was engaging with customers and trying to hold together with duct tape and glue what you were giving them and making it work. And then as we were getting ready to, fully not just come out of stealth, but, GA the product, we started, basically hiring salespeople. And that would have been summer of 2015. I think we hired our first set of salespeople. And then, yes, I was responsible for doing it until we fortunately found somebody who was far, far better at it than I am, which was, Ron, who's still our CRO today.
So, and now you are leading the Databricks field engineering. So maybe for those who don't know what's field engineering at Databricks, I think the best way to explain that would be like everybody who is technical and customer facing at the same time. So like not the engineering team, not the sales team, kind of everybody else, to simplify that. So yeah, like a big team of 2,000 people. So talking about that, what do you think what do you find the most challenging? Like, is it leading a team of 2,000 people in the era of Gen AI with all the challenges around that? Or is it, having to deal back at home with a family of 5 kids and making sure everything goes smoothly?
Ooh, that's a tough question. How about the challenge is trying to do both of those at the same time, right? Look, I think, I think you always get energy from, you get energy from one to feed into the other, candidly. Yes, from a family life perspective, most people think I'm nuts. We have 5 kids. The oldest one just turned 9, and they're all exactly 23 to 26 months apart. So you could just imagine, dinner time at our house is, quite hectic. But then against that backdrop, what that means is we didn't have any kids. Actually, I started at Databricks, when we were starting, I think a couple of days after my wedding. So it's like my wedding, has coincided with kind of the time at Databricks, and definitely didn't have any kids, when we started, which has been an interesting journey. But from a challenge perspective, I think you take that the personal life as a backdrop. The thing that's always interesting is um, the speed that things change, right? Like I always have a simple formula. For me, it's like what keeps me at some place is like, am I having fun? Am I learning? Am I making an impact? It sounds simple, but it's rules to live by. And for me, I have the attention span of a 6-year-old. So I've literally, the last time I was somewhere for more than 4 years was elementary school. And even that's not true because I switched elementary schools in the middle. So the fact that, now we've been at Databricks for, over 11 years at this point, the reality is you talked about it yourself. 11 something years ago, we were 7 people, in a room somewhere trying to, figure out how do we scale a company. And then you think about all of the iterations there of watching what's happened as cloud accelerated, what happened as the space accelerated, what happens as Databricks, continues to kind of grow from a product breadth perspective and figure out, okay, how do you stay on top of that? What are the markets? How do you go about it? How do you keep figuring out what are go to market dynamics, right? The way that you think about an organization when we were, 0 people to 50 people to 100 to 500 to now, as you mentioned, I think we're almost, 2,500 people, in field engineering, spread out all across the globe. How do you think about the role and expectations as a company from when in the early days we were so excited, about like bringing in a 20K deal to now you're talking about, deals that are kind of 8 figures or 9 figures. So there's just a unique challenge in being in all those phases. And the fact that they are so compressed, right? The speed that you're moving from one phase to the next doesn't give you time to kind of see it, plan it, digest it. You're always just trying to figure out what's around the corner. And that's both challenging but exhilarating at the same time.
And and I have a question. Like you mentioned, a lot. You are doing a lot of things, and so how do you balance work and personal time? Because I imagine you have a tons of critical like requests coming from across the world, like literally nonstop. So how do you do this compromise?
Yeah, look, I think there's twofold. I mean, there's a couple of realities, right? Which I think people always treat it as taboo, but it's not like a Databricks or any hyper growth startup is never going to be like a 9 to 4 type place, right? It's going to be there is always 10x the amount of work that there are people, and the company will always take as much as you're willing to give and offer, right? And for many of us who are here, right, uh, it's hard to do something when you feel it's just a job. And I know this will sound corny, but we do it because we're passionate about the company, what it is and what it could become. So you want to invest a lot in it. At the same time, it was very clear, to me from the beginning that it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. You're in there for a long period of time. And so um, for me, family life is incredibly important, and you make sure that you set those boundaries. Like, for example, for me, to the extent possible, it's not always the case. There's certain things like I like to see the kids off to school before they go to school. I try to make it a practice if I can, because when I'm home, when my wife works from home, to kind of carve out time to sit down and have lunch together. It's kind of important to me to, be able to be at home in time to have dinner with the kids and the family, spend some time and put the kids to bed, as well. But look, as a result, I said that there's a lot from a company perspective. That means that you make trade offs. So, for example, those who know me know one of the most common trade offs I make is whenever I'm flying somewhere, I'll almost always take the red eye. And not because I love red eyes. Red eyes suck. They're miserable. Who likes a red eye, right? But the answer is because the red eye gives me time to have dinner with the kids and tuck them into bed, say, basically goodnight to my wife before heading, to the airport, as an example. or looking at it and being careful about there's always every night hey, have a dinner or this or that, how do I get home, or after everybody's asleep getting back on to kind of work things. So as I said, you're putting in a bunch of time to work, but you've set those boundaries of what are some of the most critical things. And I think for everybody, those boundaries are different. For some of them, it's family. For some of them, it's, I want to make sure that I work out and stay healthy. For some of them, it's these are the hobbies that I need to, invest in. And I think then, the nice part about a place like a Databricks is I think we hire amazing people. We trust them to kind of know what they need to deliver and deliver it. But then within that, give them flexibility to balance their personal obligations or other things that are important to make those work while still delivering what's necessary.
So talking about like family and kids and you are a lot on AI. I'm hearing a lot of things about AI and education around the kids. Like, do you think it's going to change the way you were maybe envision raising kids? And maybe do you have something that you see changing before ChatGPT and after ChatGPT? We hear a lot of things about, private kind of AI to train your kids, educate your kids, knowing them like super well and things like that. Do you think it's going to be a game changer?
Yeah, I think it's going to be actually a game changer. There's a lot of things I'm excited about. One is I am hopeful with AI that I never have to get any of my kids a driver's license, because the thought of teaching any of them to drive is terrifying to me. So if we just have self-driving cars, I can be, happy with that. The second thing is, look, kids, people in general, but kids are sponges for basically like absorbing, information. And you do your best as a parent to both help with them. But one, even if you put aside the time, there's just stuff that they want to know that I have no idea. I don't know the, answer to it. And it is kind of funny, like way before ChatGPT in our house, we always had like Google Homes. That's what we use. Sorry to the Alexa folks. I wasn't a big Alexa fan. We were a Google Home family. And I kid you not, the majority of my kids, one of their first 10 words was Google, because they learned, for things that you just say, you'd ask a question of Google. Still to this day, my son will ask one question and he'd be like, oh, don't worry, I'm going to go ask Google. Those kind of things and the level of detail and explanation. And look, as you look at the tools out there, we all use it as well. But for the kids, of how do they gain information about the world? How do you feed their imagination when they want to understand anything and everything about it? Being able to go ask, whether it's ChatGPT, whether it's something like, Perplexity, whether it's kind of many of these are going to get embedded in, phones and the like. The fact that they have easy ways to get access to that information is critical. Now, as you might imagine, there's a whole bunch of concerns that you then have is like, exactly, if, my kids ask this question, no, that's a question I want a chance for me and my wife to answer, because we want to, kind of color like how we answer it, because there's not absolute answers to it. So there's a lot in that digital world that you're, trying to figure out. But you look at the pace where they can tailor learning from themselves and bring all of that information at their fingertips. I think that's undoubtedly going to change how they're able to go through things and go through life.
And now you will have to trust like the company behind this model to kind of give the education that matches your way of lives and everything. That's interesting.
Exactly.
And since you're talking about education, as Quentin mentioned, you have a PhD. So do you still believe that PhD is something valuable in this world, as all the information are now being available like to everyone? You can literally do anything you want.
Yeah. I think it is, valuable. Look, I know that everybody has their different thoughts of whether you should go to college, whether you should get a grad degree. Like, I don't view, a PhD candidly being about, it gave me an opportunity to read these research papers. All the papers that you read, in PhD or the textbooks are available. You can read it otherwise. I think the PhD was really, really valuable on a couple of dimensions, right? One, you just look at the connections that you build with like-minded people as well, which is incredibly valuable. But I thought that whole process of a PhD, which is dedicated, focused time where you have autonomy, but to teach you how do you go through analytical and critical thinking, right? How do you go into a world where it's not some very, very nice, well structured problem, right? That's what, in the large parts of, schooling is there is a problem. Everybody knows the answer to it. And now it's just about, you kind of memorizing it or understanding that mechanism and repeating it out. It's not how the real world works, though, right? The real world is driven by, can you enter into an area where it's unclear what even the design space is. It's unclear what the answer is, but you need to find a path forward. And I think that the incredible thing about a PhD is it lets you struggle. It lets you discover what are the different problems. It lets you figure out what is the one that's interesting for you to tackle and figure out how do you, structure, okay, how do I define the problem? How do I constrain the problem? How do I approach it? How do I understand what good enough is? How do I deal with failure? How do I deal with things that I got there, but the results weren't what I thought about, but it's and use that to move things forward in a way that you pioneer, can pioneer new approaches that then other people build upon, just like you built upon their work. It's an incredibly valuable toolkit, right? Even if you think about the, hey, I have AI is really good about giving you access to a bunch of information and maybe synthesizing it. And maybe for the simplest problems, it'll help structure it. But that way of still knowing what to ask for, how to structure it, and how to basically pull that together to create novel new things and pull it forward in a world of ambiguity, I don't think it replaces that. And I think like that skill, like I remember that much more than I remember what esoteric networking or just database paper that I read on some novel new sharding technique, in grad school. So I think in that realm, it was incredibly helpful. For me, at least, I loved it. Had to do it over again. Would absolutely go down the same path.
So how did you, like, what made you switch McKinsey and go to Databricks? Did you knew the Databricks team before, like from Berkeley, from your PhD? How did it work? Like, how did you know, okay, I'm going to give up on McKinsey, which seems like, like a nice world to be in, and start something new within Databricks?
Yeah. The short answer is, if you've ever met our CEO, Ali, he's a really persistent guy. Look, I think, I knew, obviously many of the founders from Berkeley. So, Jan was a professor there who I worked with a ton while I was there. My PhD advisor, Scott Schenker, was, kind of one of the core early, both investors and, board members as well. Ali and I were good friends, and it's remained good friends, after leaving Berkeley, kind of. And then, two of the other founders, they came in a year after me, so I knew them there. We were all part of the Rad Lab, Amp Lab, and then, two of them, so actually like Patrick and Reynold would enter after I left. So I did not know them at the time. And look, I think there was two things. I was not explicitly, looking to, for example, to leave McKinsey. McKinsey, was also, a great experience, turned a lot. And at the time period that I was leaving McKinsey, everybody would tell me I'm nuts, right? Because, in McKinsey or many of the consulting places, there's this place where you go from being a junior partner, which is what I was, to like a full partner. And you never know for sure, but they were like, hey, you're, a couple of months away from that. And that period when you become a full partner, that beginning, there's a lot, like, it's almost like a reset to figure out what you want to do. You're well compensated. So it's like the worst time in the world considered to leave. It's like the equivalent of a professor, like leaving school, like 3 months before they get tenure. It just makes no sense. But I also knew that wasn't what I wanted to do long term, right? You look at the people who are way ahead of you and you have respect for them, but you look at it and say, that's not the path. And I knew I didn't want to go join a big company, right? Because at McKinsey, you advise many of those large companies and they're doing some incredible things, but you tend to get job offers from them often. And just the pace with which they moved, it was just not really for me. And so, I mentioned I joined, Databricks right when I got married. So at my bachelor party, South Beach, Miami, Ali shows up and he's like, "Hey, we're starting a company." I was like, "You've got to be effing kidding me. Like, I don't want to talk about the company right now. I'm at my bachelor party. Leave me alone. Come find me when we're done." And sure enough, as soon as I land, I have a voicemail from him say, "Hey, okay, your bachelor party's over. Can we talk about this? We're starting a company." And, I met with the guys. I talked with them a bunch. And I remember it was, the week before the wedding, I went, met with all of them. Obviously, many of them I knew well, some of the new ones in there, heard about the vision, heard about, what they wanted to do. And for me, it was kind of simple, right? Like most startups are destined to fail. That's just the reality of it. That's how it always works. But when I looked at it, I was like, okay, first, the people are incredible, right? When you look at that, normally, and I know this is going to sound bad, you normally have maybe an MBA and a token engineer, of some form, but you had like 6 other people who were very well accomplished, like incredibly smart, but high EQ, looked at it as they had an idea of what they wanted to drive. Second, you already had, a solid technology. Again, many of them will be, and I'm going to sound dismissive. That's not fair, but it'll be like, oh, we have like a brand new iPhone app we're working on. They had kind of like a bunch of technology, like Spark, widely adopted, kind of at that pace. Third, from a investor perspective, you already had interest from somebody like a Ben Horowitz himself that wanted to go in there. And then lastly, you looked at that space that you were in, right, which was called big data back then, that if nothing else, even if it failed, getting a chance to be on the front lines of watching that journey, is pretty incredible. So I told my wife, I was like, well, actually, she told me, as she'll remind me, if you don't do this, you might as well admit to yourself you're never going to join a startup, because you're not going to get a better, even if the likelihood of success is not high, you're not going to get a better opportunity than this. And so I remember, as I said, I talked to them the week before the wedding, and a couple of days after, on our honeymoon, I remember I was in a Ryokan in Kyoto, and I FaceTimed them. I'm like, all right, I'm in. Let's do this. And so I once said that was the best decision I ever made, and then my wife gave me a dirty look, and I said it's the second best decision I ever made. But 11 years ago and change, and still loving it.
Wow, that's
Amazing.
an amazing story.
Yeah. And I have sorry. I think this is one of the questions that a lot of people has been asking me to ask you, and it was like, how does someone become a leader? And like, what's the process? I mean, like, is it something you can learn? You gonna learn by leading? Since, for example, for your case, you joined the company, it was a very small team, and now you're leading almost
Yeah.
3,000 people.
Yeah, look, I think there's absolutely a lot of training to become an amazing leader. But what I find is you've got to look for a couple of things, if I'm honest. You have to have people who are passionate about being a leader, right? So what I find is that there's still a lot of people who think that they need to go into leadership because that's the way that you make money or you get influence. I liken this as, I come from born in Iran, come from an immigrant family. And the joke is, in Iranian families, you can be anything you want to be as long as it's an engineer or a doctor and maybe a lawyer on some days, right? So there's many people who go into that, and I'm like, I don't want my doctor to be somebody that their parents forced them to be a doctor. I want it to be somebody who cares about basically helping people, right? So, as an example, at Databricks from the early days, we set it up that compensation is similar between the bands and influence is similar between individual contributors and managers. So you get people who really want to do it. I think that the second thing is there are people who you have, even though that there's a bunch of training on the job, you intrinsically see those people who have it. One of the big mistakes we oftentimes make is assume just because somebody's an amazing individual contributor and they understand the individual contributor role, they'll be phenomenal leaders. And it's absolutely not the case, right? I've seen plenty of places where, incredible individual contributors are terrible leaders. And then we have people who are good, average individual contributors be amazing leaders, right? So there's an intrinsic set of quality that you look at, right? That leaders you expect to have happen. Do they have empathy? Do they have kind of that ability to understand what makes people tick and, read them and how to interact with them? Do they naturally have a way of putting forward a vision and a strategy that galvanizes people and gets them around it? So there's a set of intrinsics on there, right? And then ultimately, if you have the intrinsics, after that, it's just people who are also, one of the biggest traits I find of good leaders is not having a problem admitting when they don't know something, when they're not good at something, and looking for ways, whether that's learning from people or surrounding themselves by people who know it, of learning. Like, look, I came to Databricks. I'd never been a manager before in my life, right? Like in consulting, you kind of lead teams, but it's weird matrix functions, like direct management role. And so not only I didn't even know what solution architecture was or field engineering was, much less I built the team, right? And as I will say, as both of you will attest to, I've made a million mistakes along the way, and I'll probably make a million more until they finally get smart and fire me, in the role. But the key piece was that curiosity of always, staying and trying to find amazing people that you respect and learn from them and pick their brain, and knowing that being okay to admit that you don't know things and asking people for help and questions. Those were great hallmarks, right? I think as we grow larger, one of the things we try to do is make it easier, because the hard part of the startup is you basically are left on your own to figure all of those things out, and you probably progress slower to get there. So it's why, as you get bigger, one of the most important things you can do is invest for your leaders in things like training and mentorship and feedback programs to help getting there. But the best leaders I know have those intrinsics, and they're always looking to figure out how do they get better and, gain that insight from anywhere that they can.
Yeah, like mentorship and coaching for sure. So as a leader, what are you actually doing? What's your daily job? Are you taking key decisions, maybe just a few decisions per day? Do you oversee everything? Do you just focus on strategic choices? Like what is it like?
Start with easier questions. That's a hard question. Look, I think at a given day, if your job as a leader is to figure out how to move things forward and be a force multiplier of some form, right? So, I think your job is to figure out not like, hey, how can I do X, Y, and Z individually, as Arsalan, but how do I help mobilize kind of 2,500 people to do things going forward? What that means in practice, right, is everybody has this, this vision that it's going to be great. If you have a large organization, you just have a bunch of people doing the work and you can coast and do nothing. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way, right? If anything, the sheer amount of things that are kind of coming towards you is fairly significant. So, you spend a lot of time trying to figure out how do you ruthlessly prioritize, where do you focus your time on, that you have a finite amount of time that gives the highest amount of ROI, right, is one. I think second, you tend to spend a lot of time, candidly, in meetings and emails that are either, in my world, like a lot of time with customers. I probably spend somewhere between, like 30 to 40% of time with, customers or kind of customer oriented activities. I think then the other thing you're trying to do is figure out how do you make the team productive, which is how do you find places where you need to provide clarity, whether it's a decision or whether it's a debate or whether it's problem solving or framing the problem. to then unblock people from being able to go out and execute, right? So there's a significant amount of time spending there, whether that's through an escalation or a strategy meeting or anything of that like, right? And then you're also spending a significant amount of time with your team. Like I am a big believer in one-on-ones with the direct team and skip levels because one, it gives me a bunch of information about how the organization is going. But a large part of my responsibility is to also invest in those people, to kind of develop them, to grow them, to learn from them, as well. So that mix, which is, a combination of customer time, which is kind of, internal with the team time, and then which is like unblocking strategy, getting decisions, driving it forward. I think that I would say that that's the bulk of it. There are days that you get to the end, which one of the things that I missed from, being an IC was, especially in the early days, I spent, basically I was focused on front end pieces of the development, right? Which was all sorts of fun, basically late at night trying to understand JavaScript and jQuery and Backbone JS. But so as a result, it meant I knew at the end of the day, and we had demos every Friday, and it was cool because I could get to show up and I'd be like, look at all of these things I built. You very clearly, in a tangible way, knew what you drove forward. There are admittedly times as a leader that you kind of ask at the end of the day, you're like, I know I was in a lot of meetings and I know I sent a lot of emails. I hope I move things forward. Maybe yes, maybe no. So I think figuring out how do you view, measure the impact and making sure you're working on the right things is another big thing that you're constantly trying to make sure that you understand and refine.
Yeah, and I mean, I can see how it can be a big challenge because I think if it's a very small team, then you can easily see, who is doing what's the friction, how you can improve and help everybody. If the team starts being, really big, and especially I've seen like in previous companies, you have so many layers, and yeah, like it's really hard for the top management to know what's actually going on at the IC level because you have like a big bias in the reporting process. Like everybody would, kind of sell you what they want to sell to the level below, and then at the end, like you think it's going well, maybe it's not going well, or the other way around. So I think it's really like I would be really, I wouldn't know how to solve that, to be honest.
Well,
It's like a really big
look,
challenge.
the key part is it is a hard problem, right? Because at some point you realize that no matter what you do, you get people who've come, later on in time. If you haven't done a good job of explaining to them the culture of the company, they start trying to manage upwards, right? And so if you really want, well, there's two things you can all say to me, to piss me off. One is if I'm going to the meeting, if you ask me, Arsalan, do you need somebody technical to help you in the meeting? That's number one. You can really piss me off by asking me that and insinuating that I don't know the product. The second piece is when you hear, oh, we didn't want to escalate this to you. We didn't think this was worthy of your time. I was like, I don't know. Like people start worrying about bad news filtering up, or, they want to basically get it to you really late. And the only way you do that is you basically make it clear that that's what you're seeking out. But I will literally arbitrarily start, pinging random people in the organization to ask them, well, what's going on? What about X? What about Y? And I'll oftentimes do those meetings on purpose without any of the people in the chain in between, not to circumvent those people, but because I know that it'll be easier for me to get kind of very, very transparent, clear information, that way. So, that notion of continuing to be paranoid and truth seeking to figure out what's going on, good or bad, and validate it is a never ending, piece. But I think it's really important, even more so as the organization grows.
Yeah, and as you did mention, like the team is growing, and you have to accept, let's say, as a leader, to lose sometimes some control, or you're in like in a way where you still want to go deep into some topics and be like in a founder mode.
I don't know. I mean, founder mode, has become the most popular thing after, what was that? I think Paul Graham posted the blog on it. Look, I think that there are different ways of doing it. I think on the one hand, you want, and different people have different styles. And I'm not saying one is more effective than the other. Everybody seems to think everything is like in absolute terms. In general, one, you hire incredible people because you expect them, to be able to be autonomous, right? And to be able to drive things forward. If you're literally in every single decision that's made, there's no way that you'll scale. That said, I sit on the side of oftentimes driven more by curiosity. For good or for bad, if you ask people kind of report like, I love to be in the details. I love to be in the details. I like to debate the details. I like to figure it out because I also think, again, it's not out of some lack of trust or perspective, but I think that there's two things. I think that the core element of, founder mode, if you want to call it, is, those leaders have very, very strong visions and perspective of what's going on. And they are eager to make sure that that vision can be executed upon, right? And you can't do that if you just fly at a 10,000 foot level. The second thing is many of the decisions we make are not easy. They're not trivial. They're not like, to that point that you asked me early on about the PhD, they're not like, hey, does 2 + 2 = 4 or 5? It's not at that level, right? I think that they're big abstract pieces, and a large part is, as a leader, you want to be involved in figuring out, how do we shape that? How do we think about that? How do we structure that? How do we set the right set of principles and then let the team go, basically implement it. But that comes back to that point I talked about, where it comes to ruthless prioritization, because you can't be involved in everything. I once had a leader told me there may be 100 things. All 100 of them, if you do them, you will do them differently than other people. But if you try to do all 100 of them differently, you won't have enough time. You'll make everybody go crazy, and you yourself will go crazy. So pick the 5 or 10 that are really, really important and drive those ruthlessly, because those are what determine the outcome. So that figuring out what are the big ones you want to lean in on is where you spend a lot of time as the leader.
And I just want to add something. It's like a tribute. I've been with you in some meetings, and I can truly say that you can move rocks much easier and faster than a lot of people I've met. So
it's okay. You don't have to say the nice things. I already came on, this interview.
No,
but I appreciate it nonetheless.
It's only because everybody's. Yeah, go ahead.
That's so true. Like, I've seen like how you move rocks, and how like you can talk with any customer in any topic. And this is something I heard from ICs, many ICs. I'm not throwing flowers. This is the reality. So just wanted to say it to you. And one more thing, do you have a word before we close the meeting?
Yeah, look, from my side, one, appreciate you guys having me on here. I think it's awesome, the things that you guys are doing here. And look, many of the questions you asked was about what is the trajectory, what is the road to get there, what's the right answer. I think the big thing I oftentimes define to people, like at least I share, is, because we heard this a lot at the early days of Databricks, which is like, oh, you guys are just some young academics. It's cute. You're building something great, but you can look at X, Y, or Z, because that's how they did, and you have to emulate it. And you spend a lot of time with imposter syndrome, trying to figure out, how do I do what other people did? And I think one of the most important things to realize, at least for me, and I still realize it on a daily basis, is, as a leader, be confident in what you're doing and the DNA, and paving your own path, right? Don't be so arrogant that you think you know everything, that it's perfect. Don't close your eyes to what everybody else, is doing. Learn as much as you can from others, the good things to do, things not to do, things that are kind of don't make sense in your world. But if you do that and kind of keep a little bit of that humility, and knowing that you're not perfect, you can always do better, but be confident in making your own way around things. I think those are the big things. And, what I found is, because I think about some of the mentors that I gravitate towards, people who kind of have that authenticity, that transparency, that kind of like genuine humility, were the ones that I was the most eager to follow, right? And figure out how to get there. And so, as you think about that, whether you are a people manager or whether you're as an IC leader and setting the pace, just kind of remembering those principles, I've always found have, at least for me, served me well.
Amazing. Thank you so much for this session and sharing all those crunchy details. Thank you so much, Arsalan.
Of course. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you.